all that is happening when you do sustained coherence, and that's what the heart lock-in is for. So the three techniques you mentioned, for example, I'll just recap. Freeze frame is a decision-making tool. Cut-through is an emotional repatterning tool. Heart lock-in is sustaining coherence. And that's three of the tools that we have in many of the HeartMath training programs.
It seems like the whole focus and understanding of coherence has also to do with the well-being and integrative whole of companies, of families, of any cooperative groups, teams, everything. And that without really understanding coherence, we can't often achieve it. I mean, sometimes it happens without the consciousness, but I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I think the world is, when it's operating right, is a coherent system, right? The way nature functions, for example. When it works as a coherent system. So you can take the concept of coherence from the individual biological, which we've been talking a lot about that, in our show today, but you expand that beyond that into how interpersonal coherence looks. And that can be immediate. You mentioned families. How we function in our families. How are our families functioning? What's the balance? What's the synchronization within the family unit? And then you expand that beyond that into larger groups of people, like a company, for example, an organization. An organization is, a company is a group of people with a shared common vision, all working towards that for various reasons and motivation, whether it's salary or whether they're really on a mission about it or the combination thereof. How organized or how coherent is that system, which we call a company? You can expand it out from there. Where we've gone now is looking at the entire, planet and the planetary coherence. How does humanity function as a whole? How does humanity interrelate with and interact with the Earth itself? I mean, the Earth is a living system. It produces energy fields. How do we relate to those fields? How do those fields relate to us? This is the genesis of the Global Coherence Initiative, which is one of our newer initiatives here at HeartMath. It's a bringing together of large groups of people, increasing the coherence amongst that group of people, and then looking for measurable changes that occur in the Earth's geomagnetic and ionospheric fields. So lots going on there. So you can expand coherence out and out and out. It starts right internally in our physical body between the heart and the brain. And that's where we started our conversation today. But that's at the most singular level of what coherence is. It's, the interactions between heart and brain and the quality of the communication between those two parts of our physiology. But it goes far, far beyond that, all the way to global coherence and probably beyond. So the concept of coherence is a natural aspect, I think, of what the universe provides, really.
How do you envision coherence happening between, let's say, the people of a country and their government when there's a lot of incoherence?
Well, I guess the envision, I don't know. I mean, I'm not so much of a visionary in that context. I do know that there's a way in which people, when they come in from the heart, begin to naturally begin to want to find solutions to problems. It begins to break down some of the feelings of necessary separation that we have, and that's part of the problem, is polarization, separation. We see a lot of that right now in the era that we're in our global history. But I think over time, there's a need that's perceived and able to be seen very clearly that needs to be some give and take on both sides of something for a viable solution to work out. If nothing else, Kim, some of the situations we may run into in our future are going to necessitate that we do it. We have choice. We can avoid some of that, and we can make changes, that can keep us from having to go through the school of hard knocks to understand it. But when it finally comes down to it, the world's going to change whether we like it or not. And it's going to push us all to a point where we have to learn to cooperate more. We have to learn to break down some of the walls of separation. And it's already beginning to happen. We see isolated cases of it all the time. And I remember back in 2008, for example, when the economic crisis was really hitting hard and people were losing their homes and things. And I kept seeing TV show after TV show about how people were learning to live together, work together. They were taking people into their homes,
Absolutely.
They rent. There were people moving around doing different things, and they were talking about, what a good time it was and how much they were enjoying it, and they never thought they would, and on it went. So there was just a mini example of, there was a necessity. People needed somewhere to live, so they found a way to work it out, and then they actually enjoyed it. So that's going to happen more and more, whether it's a sharing of resources, where there's changes in, how governmental structures relate to the general public. All that stuff is up in the air right now.
Absolutely.
And it's chaotic times, and I'll I'll say it like it is. It is an era of high-speed change, and it's creating a lot of chaos. Ultimately, I'm an optimist. I think it's going to work out that we have a world that's functioning much better than the one we have today. And it's not going to be that long or that far down the road before we see a lot of that beginning to take solid form. But we are in a position right now where there's still a lot of hard road to walk. So I'm a pragmatist on both sides of that perception. And we've got to utilize our own intelligence and our own hearts to make sense of it all and to come up with the viable solutions that we need. I think the solutions to many of the world's problems are right in front of our face, but we've got to slow it down enough that we can see into them.
That's extremely astute. Suppose you have people in a particular group that are seeking heart coherence, and they're doing the exercises that you've created, but they seek and they desire heart coherence with others, to integrate with others in this realm. But let's say the other people are not interested. It's not of interest. It's not on the radar. They don't care. Do you still think coherence is possible?
Yeah, I think so. I think, what happens is over time, one thing begins to influence another. If you think about mass human behavior, look at the attitudes that have shifted just, amazingly. Where large numbers of people thought one thing and then they thought something else,
Right.
It didn't take long for that shift to occur. I can think of things like, I'll never use an answering machine, back in the day, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I'm not going to talk to these things. I'm not going to have anybody talk to me on some kind of recording or whatever. And yet, then everybody had them, That's just one example. There's better ones than that. I can't think of one at the moment. But perception of certain things changes very quickly when mass human consciousness can move like that, and it does, and it has shown that it can. And so there are a lot of people that could care less about coherence. They're looking out for themselves. They want to operate their life that way, and that's okay. The good news is that coherence is ordered. It's actually focus power. So it's not as diffused. It takes a little bit of coherence to offset a lot more incoherence.
Oh, that's good.
Because it's concentrated. An analogy I can use would be if you ever watch TV and they have these things, you'll see an advertisement about this amazing cleaning solution that'll clean anything, everywhere. And all you have to do is put one cap of it in a gallon of water, and then, it'll scrub off every piece of dirt you got in your house, And that's an example that one little cap is concentrated. So coherence works the same way. A little bit of coherence can permeate a whole gallon of water.
That's awesome. I love that analogy. That's a great analogy.
And so one of the things we saw early on in there, we've done lots of different kinds of sort of science to support HeartMath, and one of the ways we did it was with psychometric, surveys, psychological surveys. We created one with the Naval Postgraduate School here in California, and we have used it for a long time to evaluate the effectiveness of our organizational training programs. We started seeing these amazing changes throughout the organization when only a relatively small percentage of the people had been trained. Would be like in a hospital, for example, with 1,200 employees, we trained 400 of them, and changes began to occur throughout the hospital in everything from retention to patient satisfaction. And what we began to determine is that those 400, just with the way they operated, were having some sort of an influence on the other 800. If there was a change in the overall culture, whether what people had been through HeartMath training or not, or whether they were interested in things like that or not, their behaviors began to change or conform some to a more coherent environment that was being created by people who were practicing the HeartMath training. It's an example of the little cap of solution having an effect on a larger amount of water.
Do you think that emotional maturity precedes heart intelligence, or heart intelligence precedes emotional maturity, or do you think they're one and the same, like the front and back of the hand?
Good question. I haven't really thought about it in terms of which comes first.
Or if they're the same thing, really.
Well, I'm not sure they're quite the same thing either. Emotional maturity is an outgrowth for sure of heart intelligence. I will say that.
All right.
But I think you have to have some emotional maturity in the first place to access your heart intelligence. One of the things about it is that, if you think about it, most people have a good heart in there somewhere.
Right.
And even if they're just totally rebellious, emotionally, mismanaged and all of that, if you find them in the right time and the right moment and the right thing triggers it, their hearts just come alive like you just see it in them, You know, you can be the meanest guy in town, you know, having all kinds of problems and all kinds of people, always arguing, always fighting, and he goes to the mall and this little